Hello, welcome to join today's special event, our 2022 Landscape Architecture Distinguished Alumni Lecture Series with Mr. Peter Kindel. So I know this is it's 5:30, but let's wait maybe one more minute until we already have nearly 40 attendees. But let's wait one more minute until all guests will join and enjoy today's show, which will begin with Professor Paul Yeracro's introduction. So let's wait just one more minute. Okay, so yeah, so we are waiting a little bit, a couple, maybe 30 seconds until more attendees will enjoy today's show from the beginning of the event. So let's wait maybe 30 seconds.
Will do.
Okay, I think it's 5:31 and we already have close to more than 40 attendees. So I think we can begin the special event. So Professor Yeracro, would you please begin today's lecture series?
Certainly. Well, welcome out there to everyone. Tonight's a special night for a couple of reasons. We both celebrate and welcome our newest members of the National Academic Honorary Sigma Lambda Alpha, the Gamma chapter here at MSU, and Peter Kindel, our 2022 Distinguished Alumni inductee, our award winner. Congratulations to Andrea Badea, Dustin Kreis, Katie Mack, and Claire Schluchner, who are our Sigma Lambda Alpha inductees for the year. First, I really do want to welcome everyone to Peter's talk entitled Biomorphic Urbanism, our SPD speaker series for spring lecture. I'm very pleased to have Peter Kindel here. Pete is a 1986 grad of our BLA program, who went on to earn his Master of Architecture and Master of City and Regional Planning degrees from the University of Pennsylvania. For the last 25 plus years, he's worked all over the world for Skidmore, Owings Merrill, or SOM as they are commonly known. He's a principal with the company, completing projects in landscape architecture, landscape planning, master planning, urban design, and architecture on 5 different continents. One of his most notable works is his completion of the Bahrain National Plan for the Kingdom of Bahrain. So some very heady stuff and a wide reach. Peter is currently the director of SOM's San Francisco office for SOM, and was published in the April 2019 National Geographic issue on cities. His piece, his office's piece, his team's piece was entitled City of the Future, with some outstanding graphics that showed most of the world what landscape architects and architects can really do. Within that article, they covered issues of ecology and water and energy and livability and culture for cities of the future. Also, Mr. Kindel was our gracious host during the 2018 Linda and Peter Redardi experiential learning trip to San Francisco, presenting current works of his firm at the offices and guiding a walking tour of downtown and the San Francisco Bay waterfront pier developments. And I'd like to thank Pete also for his sending the LA program to SOM portfolio publication featuring the work of his office's urban design and landscape planning projects. They have a really happy home on the book cart in the third year design studio right now, and they're getting moderate use. I encouraged them last semester. So without further ado, I'm going to say to all of you out there, my friends, welcome Mr. Peter Kindel, the MSU Distinguished Alumni Inductee of 2022 Biomorphic Urbanism.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. And it's great to see everybody. And Chairman Kim, thank you for this honor. I'm thrilled to be recognized in this manner. As Paul mentioned, I did attend Michigan State and graduated in 1986. And Paul was one of my instructors at that time. So I've known him for quite a long time. So we go back.
I'm a real old guy.
So I'd like to walk you through some of the work I've been working on since I left Michigan State. And Wesley, it's telling me I can't share. So maybe if you could fix that. Or June, make me a co-host. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and walk you through this. There's quite a number of slides. I'm going to move pretty fast and try and get through this in about an hour. But as Paul mentioned, I have entitled this Biomorphic Urbanism, and that'll be the second half of the presentation. I am working with SOM, as Paul mentioned. Skidmore and Merrill's a multidisciplinary firm that has offices around the world. And I think maybe what everyone may not know is I actually grew up in East Lansing. And so I have a long lifetime affiliation really with the city and the university. And Michigan State holds a very important place in my life. So this honor has extra meaning for me. But I did grow up in East Lansing. I spent a lot of time on the campus, and then ultimately decided to go to school at the landscape architecture department. So it was really my first introduction to design. I worked as a landscape architect for about 3 or 4 years, and then I decided to go back and get a degree in architecture and city planning. And I lived in Philadelphia and went to Penn from 91 to 94. I got a joint degree there. And that was really where my interest in urban planning and urban design was really stimulated. And that was a really wonderful experience to be introduced to the work of Lou Kahn in the lower right and Frank Furness, where our library was in the upper right. So it was a very also transformational experience for me to go to Penn and be exposed to the design culture there. I did join SOM shortly after I left Penn. And this is our team in the upper left. This was a picture from about 4 or 5 years ago, but we had a number of really wonderful professionals in our group, and we called our group the City Design Practice. And that was a term that we gave ourselves because we wanted to focus on urban design specifically. We wanted to focus on cities. We felt that the problems and opportunities of cities really were fundamental to what's happening in the world today. And the man third from the right here is a fellow named Phil Enquist, and he was our partner in charge of the practice. And he was really a big thinker. He did this project in the lower left on the Great Lakes, where he re-envisioned the Great Lakes as an ecosystem. And today, the practice has 10 offices around the world. You can see the map in the lower right. And so during Phil's tenure, and while I've been here, we've actually expanded the practice to these 10 international offices, and we're doing work all over the world with about 100 different professionals, landscape architects, urban planners, and other designers. And there's actually one other person from Michigan State in our group, John Law, who graduated, I think, 5 or 6 years after me. We organize our work around 10 principles that we use to structure our projects. Urban design is a complicated process, so we really try and use these ideas and principles to organize ourselves as we work on projects. One of my first projects at SOM was Millennium Park, and I was a young designer and was called in to help with this project and did some of the very early drawings. And I often think back to my work with Tom Hazlitt and landform analysis. This project was topographically very complex. It's a series of decks over a rail yard. And so as the master planner or part of the master planning team, I was charged with the overall design of the park and the topographic and circulation system in the project. So that was a great introduction to large scale work in the city of Chicago, a really landmark project. I also worked on this project called the Glen, which is north of Chicago. This was my first introduction to large scale land planning, 1,200 acres. It's now been completely built out. And one day, Phil, my boss, asked me to sketch a design for the main park, which you can see on the right side. So we did that over a week or two. And it turns out they ended up building the lake and the park exactly as we drew it. So you can go out there today and it looks very much like this drawing on the right-hand side. So that was really thrilling to see these projects built, because oftentimes with large-scale work, you don't often see the results. I thought I would focus again for the first half of the discussion on my work in Hong Kong. This was a very transformative time for me. My wife and I moved to Hong Kong in 2014. We were there for 4 years, and we essentially built the Hong Kong studio for SOM from scratch. When I got there, there was just one other person, and by the time I left, there was these 16 people that made up the studio. So it was a very successful run. We did over 20 projects during that 4-year period, 3.5-year period. And one of the great things about going to Hong Kong was it's really the center of Asia. And this red circle on the right contains over half the Earth's population. Essentially within a 7-hour flight of Hong Kong lives half the world's population. So it's a very active region. It's growing very quickly. And all the darker gray countries that are colored here are countries in which we did work. So we were based in Hong Kong, but moving around Asia quite a bit. The issues in Asia are substantial. They're listed here. So many of our projects dealt with these very issues, some of which are shared in North America, but in Asia, there's extra pressure because of the population growth. And there's not the legal structure and land ownership structure that allows cities to grow like they do in the United States. So it's a very active and sometimes chaotic planning environment. So I thought I'd just show you a few projects. We organized our studio around a few different initiatives. So one was really to extend the practice and support SOM. A second one is, again, to commit to cities to keep that mission alive in our work in Asia. One of the big components that I advocated for was environmental restoration. Environmental degradation in Asia is a big issue. So we tried to make all of our projects support the idea of restoration. And then the economic and cultural relevance of our work is very important. Asia has many different countries, many different cultures. I think in the Southeast Asian League of Nations, there's 10 individual countries. Each of them had their own culture and traditions. So we really tried to understand that. And then, of course, elevate the level of work in Southeast Asia and Asia in general. So bringing a level of excellence and craft to urbanism. In my 3.5 years there, we did about 24 projects, which are listed here in the cities that are shown as the red dots. That's quite a few projects for 3.5 years. That's about 8 or so projects per year. So we were doing a lot of different work, and I couldn't have done it without my team. They were a super talented team, very committed to what we were trying to do. One of the cities we worked a lot in was Jakarta. The very first project we worked on was on the eastern side of Jakarta for this client that we had been pursuing for quite a while. They had very significant land holdings, which you can see on the right. However, it was right on the sea edge. And so what we did was we worked with the existing hydrological systems to structure his plan around these drainage corridors, which you can see in this image. We worked oftentimes with consulting landscape architects. In this case, it was a firm out of Toronto, but you can see the water system in this site was very complex on the right-hand side. So the project really became about accommodating sea level rise and these floodwaters, but also trying to create good urbanism, good roads, good public space, which you can see here. And then we had the opportunity to work on a detailed plan. This is the phase 1 portion of the project. So we were able to take some of these ideas further in this part of the project. And you can see some of the drawings across the bottom. We were relying heavily on landscape concepts to manage the open space and stormwater concepts. And then I think what's exciting about urban design, at least for me, is the integration of architecture with public space and landscape. That's really the areas that I am most interested in. How do these systems work together to build communities? Another project in Jakarta was this one off the coast. One of the issues in these countries is because the land ownership structure is less clear than, say, in the United States or in Western nations, oftentimes the strategy is to build in the water, in these shallow areas off of the coast. And so these development rights are awarded to developers and they dredge and build islands. So this was one of those projects. And so we worked with this owner to create a development concept for this island. Again, promoting concepts of good urbanism. You can see here the building forms, both low rise and high rise. We connected this into the Jakarta subway system, so you could actually take the subway back into the main part of the city. So one of the things we always try and do is have a mass transportation or public transit component to our work. This project was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. This was also a really interesting project. It was an old airfield that was being decommissioned and redeveloped. And you can see our diagrams in the upper right. We often try and clarify the principles, the design principles through these diagrams. This is the overall development plan. What was interesting about the site is they carved the airfield out of the hills. So part of the site was hilly and part of the site was flat. So the concept was to essentially recreate, use the density that the developer was asking for to rebuild the hills that used to be there. And then we designed this central open space as the primary park. This one also had a regional trail link and subway connections that actually connected down to Singapore. So this also was a high-speed rail station. Here you see a view of that central park. Again, a very dense project, but you can see how those building forms begin to recreate the hills, and the central park actually functioned as the valley for the project. So it accepted the stormwater. And in this image, you can see kind of how we tried to design the structured parking below grade. And then in the upper left, how the Central Park organized the project as a primary public space. This was a competition that we won. So the project is moving forward. But like so many places and so many projects in Asia, a lot of times it'll change substantially from the original competition submission. So here's a view of that Central Park area. Another project that we worked on, also a reclamation project, is this one in Manila. And like many of these cities, Manila has a lot of population growth, again, demand for development land. This was a shallow area off the coast of Manila, just south of the city. As a practice, we have really tried to not do much reclamation anymore. Reclamation creates tremendous impacts on the seabed. So we have begun to move away from reclamation projects, but at this time we were still doing them. But what we tried to do was create some offsetting benefits. So you can see to the left and right of this, we proposed restoration of the ecological areas that have been lost. So it was a way of balancing the impacts of reclamation with the restoration, through the restoration of these ecological habitats. So we always tried to take a bigger view of how the project began to be connected back to the city. And in that light, we then leveraged this project to create these 10 principles for Manila. This is the diagrams on the right illustrate how reclamation could be done in a more sensitive manner, but still respecting the riverways and the estuaries that are so important to the city. And again, we always look at things holistically. So not only from a development standpoint, but from an ecological standpoint and a transportation standpoint. So these were always good ways to understand the impacts of the projects overall. Another important project that I worked on was this one, Cook Cove, in Sydney, Australia. This was the first time I had been to Australia and worked in Australia. This was an existing golf course right next to the airport that was being considered for redevelopment. What was interesting, it was at the mouth of this river, and this site also would flood occasionally. And so the project was designed to accommodate flooding. And you can see this green channel down the middle of the project. That was actually is a floodway. So when this river starts to rise, it would actually, we designed it in a manner that that water could cross over this road and go through the project. And then the whole southern part of the project where these recreation fields are was designed to flood, to accommodate this stormwater. So that's something we spend a lot of time on, thinking about how changes in sea level or flood control issues can be handled on these sensitive sites. Spent a lot of time on the water edge and some of the urban spaces to really create an active community. This was a mixed use community, had office and residential. We always try and advocate for mix of uses because it reduces car travel, and then fold in the ecology component. We also worked in Vietnam. Here's a few projects. I'll go a little bit quickly through these, but Vietnam, this is Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon. Like all of these cities undergoing continued growth, this was actually a shipyard that was being considered for redevelopment. We see a lot of that in Asia, just like we do in the United States, these industrial sites being turned over to development. Another one just up the river from that one is this Thu Duc site. This was a really fun project as well. Again, right on the river, an old industrial site. But what was really great about it is it had a MRT station or a subway station right here in the center of the project. So we based the whole project around that transportation link and the river character. So you can see the blue line through the middle of the plan was a canal that we introduced in the project to really emphasize that riverfront and water connection. So we always try and give the projects an identity that's drawn from the place that it is, the context. This was again a a mixed use project that had both low rise and high rise buildings. Lower rise towards the river edge and higher rise towards the highway and MRT subway line. We spend a lot of time on massing, the massing configuration of the buildings as urban designers, and then oftentimes we will hand them off to our architecture colleagues at SOM to advance them. Sometimes in really highly collaborative environments, we will often work directly with the architects on specific buildings in our master plan so that we can really tailor the architecture to meet the master plan goals. We also worked in Da Nang. This was an extension again of the downtown core. This project actually had been reclaimed, but they had not yet developed the land. So we were working with previously reclaimed land, but we're crafting a new plan for it. So one of the things we always try and do is integrate the new development with the existing cities that we're working in. So we will always connect to existing roadways, link to existing open space connections, and really try and create a plan that is respectful of the location in which it's situated, and make it feel like it's an extension of the city, not a separate project. Another issue in Asia is the intermittent development patterns that you see. And on the drawing on the right, you can see in the gray, these were neighborhoods that had already been developed. So the client asked us to come in and propose a development strategy for the remaining land between these developments. So the site boundary was extremely convoluted here, but there was a river running through the middle of the area that we were looking at. And so we structured the plan around that river. And here you can see a view of the project and how we began to do that. So this river ran from the upper left to the lower right, and that really became the central organizing element for the whole project. So I often draw on my landscape background to read these site indicators about how the land wants to be developed or could be developed, and then try and leverage those as assets rather than as constraints. So you'll probably see in many of these projects this common thread of landscape architecture running through the urban design work. Back in Jakarta, we had a similar issue with existing villages that were on the site. You can see in the lower right drawing, there was tremendous complexity in the development boundary. These villages, oftentimes, people have been living here for many, many years. They don't want to move, or they are reluctant to move. So again, we've tried to weave this new development in with those existing villages in a way that in 20 or 30 years, it would be just part of a larger urban idea. There were some areas where we were able to develop more densely, which are shown in the taller buildings, but most of the project was actually low density. The last project I wanted to share from my Hong Kong days is this Siegel Island master plan in China. And this was a really unique project. It's in the Pearl River Delta, which is one of the major delta systems in China, one of the big 3 or 4 deltas just north of Hong Kong. And what was really fascinating about this project is it was an island in the middle of the Pearl River, what they call the Lion River in China. So the planning authorities from the city of Guangzhou wanted to redevelop the island as a destination for citizens of the city. It had extensive farming, and they wanted to make it into more of a tourist-based destination. So we advocated really for three things. One is to preserve the existing villages and agriculture as a key part of the concept. The second is to restore the wetlands that used to exist between these islands, which you can kind of see on the drawing on the left. And then third was to introduce this tourism component. Because it's in a high risk flood area, there is a levee around the entire island. So we worked extensively with my team, on which there were a few landscape architects in addition to me, to soften these levees, which you see in the lower drawings, to reinstitute and reincorporate mangroves, which protect against flooding, still leaving the levee to protect the land, but to soften it. And then we did these fun renderings. We were trying to look at new ways to express these ideas. So we came up with this new way of doing our renderings, which was a little more fun and a little more accessible for non-designers. And then created this tourism map on the right, which showed how the island could be accessed and used by different people that are coming in from the city. So this really was a wonderful project that touched on a lot of key issues that I'm particularly interested in, and overall was a big success. I'll skip this project. We oftentimes do research along with the work that we're doing. And as I mentioned in the Manila case, we did a larger strategy for Manila. We did the same thing actually for Jakarta, which we ended up calling the Jakarta Principles, because the projects we were working on were not unique. Different developers were doing similar projects all across Jakarta. So we said, why don't we just take a couple of weeks and let's just write down the best practice principles that we thought were important. So we again structured them around different themes that had to do with access to ports in the upper left, the idea of green edges on the islands and reclamation in the upper right, the idea of restoration of marine habitats, and then connectivity in the lower right, how to link these places together. Another great project that we took on as a research project was what we called the Hong Kong waterline. And oftentimes I'd have the studio do these projects during the Christmas holidays, because a lot of times our work would get a little quieter. So we would just take the 2 weeks around Christmas and New Year's to do a 2-week research piece. This idea was generated by the fact that Hong Kong's coastline is actually not that accessible. There's a lot of trails in the middle of Hong Kong Island, but the coastline is tough to get to in many places. So we said, what if there was a water trail all the way around the perimeter of Hong Kong? A lot of places this trail exists, but it's not continuous. In other words, it doesn't go all the way around the island. So that was really the concept, was to connect up some of the pieces. And then this image showed how you'd get around one of the more dramatic pieces of the coastline. Hong Kong Island is a very topographically interesting place, a lot of drama to the mountains and coastline. So we had an idea that where it did go through some of these more natural areas, we'd actually raise the trail up in the air. These would be prefabricated components or segments of the trail that would be modular. And you could insert these into the more natural landscape, so they wouldn't impact the natural lands. They would be above it, and it would also just be simpler to move through the landscape. But you're not fully removed from the landscape, you're just outside of it. So this is a rendering of what that might look like. Again, you're a little bit up in the trees, and there would be a bikeway and a pedestrian trail. So that was a really fun project. The second half of my show, I did want to talk about this concept of biomorphic urbanism. So here's an image of Siegel Island. And one of the generators or impetuses of this concept was the fact that I was seeing so much change and environmental degradation in Southeast Asia. And I began to think about what the real purposes of our design work. And I began to think about what the really most important elements of our projects were. So it started with this idea of biophilia, which many of you may know, that's based on the concept that everyone has an inherent attraction to the natural world. I think most of you have heard of this idea of biophilic design, which is based on that concept, and it's introducing nature into design, whether it's interior plants or buildings that have plants on them, but bringing nature into closer contact with people. There's also another idea out there that's called biomimicry, and that states that our buildings should mimic nature. In other words, can nature teach us how to build better buildings or better places? The problem with this is that it often results in projects like this, where we're putting plants on buildings and it's very expensive. And my concern with it was that it doesn't really have a beneficial impact on the ecosystems in which these buildings exist. It does serve a purpose, but it doesn't have that beneficial quality. So I began to think more about how we could integrate ecology into our urbanism, and the fact that every city has kind of a unique DNA, that its DNA is defined by its ecology and its culture. And every city is different. So I came up or developed this idea of biomorphic urbanism, which states that ecological systems should be a foundational input into how we think about cities. So this is hydrology, habitat, topography, climate, but we also need to incorporate cultural identity and social systems into our work. So these two concepts are really fundamental to how biomorphic urbanism is initiated, or the foundation of that concept. So the idea really states that taking these two inputs, we can begin to develop a unique response to every urban design problem that we address, incorporating social inputs and ecological inputs. So how are they different? Biomimicry is more the emulation or mimicry of nature. Biophilic design is about introducing nature into projects or adding it. Biomorphic urbanism is really having our cities shaped by ecology and culture. So it's restorative in its purpose. So a few corollaries to the idea. One is that these two are distinct and should be considered and discussed for their independent attributes. And that each of them has a different purpose and value, that both of them have a distinct purpose, but also a distinct value, and those should be honored and understood. But to hybridize them begins to diminish the impact of both of them, potentially. Not always, but sometimes. So what we want to avoid is this idea of greenwashing, where we simply add nature randomly into our environments without that restorative benefit of the ecosystem. Corollary 4 is that our engineered systems have become too dominant in how we plan cities. This is a picture of the LA River, which has been channelized and basically stripped of its ecological character. These two ideas can be complementary, that they can support each other. They're not mutually exclusive. We can bring them together, as we did at Millennium Park. and that both can be understood and optimized for their highest performance and highest value. So again, this idea of complementarity, this is a project in Jakarta, that these two concepts should work hand in hand to raise the value of our work. It's also specific. Biomorphic urbanism can be very specific and distinct to its place. So a project in Florida should look and feel differently than a project in Michigan, for instance. Our design work should be granular, meaning that it's scaled for people, not for cars. That biomorphic urbanism is additive. So every project we do should add to the quality of our cities, add to the quality of a project or place, that we're not working in isolation. And that it's connective, it joins things together rather than separates things. So what we may have previously considered a barrier or a separation in a city, we can now begin to understand as a connective element, such as the Chicago River. But most importantly, biomorphic urbanism is restorative, that it rehabilitates our ecosystems rather than continues to compromise them. This is a project that I did in China. I didn't present it here today, but this idea that it's intentional, that design does matter. What we choose to put forward as a design is important and should reflect our intentions as a society. And then finally, on the issue of transportation, which is an important component, but I feel that transportation systems have been too dominant in how we talk about cities, especially in our suburbs. So these systems should support our goals for urbanization and ecosystems, they're really not the drivers of good urbanism. Streets are public spaces and they should be thought of and treated as public spaces. This project by Glen is a good example of that. Our streets should be thought of as public space. Lately, people have been talking a lot about smart cities, but I would assert that smart cities are not simply how much technology we add, but how that technology strengthens this idea of ecology and cultural connectivity. And this is the Chungkichung River in Seoul, Korea, which is an old stream bed that has been restored as a civic space, a really wonderful park. Now, it's not necessarily ecologically restorative, but it is restorative in the sense that it has brought people together. So it's strengthening that cultural idea and connecting people with this location where a river used to be. This used to be a highway and they've now made it into a linear park. So we should be leveraging technology and transportation systems as a means to build stronger cities. So the principles of biomorphic urbanism are pretty simple, just 4 of them. So principle 1 is to restore natural systems. Principle 2 is to densify urban districts. Principle 3 is to diversify land use. So we get away from these single land use ideas. And then principle 4 is to connect communities together. So bringing in that technology and transportation systems to connect people together. So this whole effort was really an attempt to simplify and clarify my own personal design approach so that I can communicate it more clearly to my clients and to my colleagues. So I think that was really the generative purpose of this biomorphic urbanism idea. And then finally, I wanted to end on the National Geographic work that Paul mentioned earlier. I did have a chance to meet the executive editor of National Geographic at an event in Hong Kong. And ironically, it turns out that she grew up in Ann Arbor and went to Michigan State. She went to our communications school. She's now the executive editor of National Geographic, wonderful woman. So we were talking about Michigan and National Geographic, of course, and she has moved the magazine into a more of a advocacy role. So looking at issues of climate change and social inequity. And I said to her, I said, if you're ever doing a project about cities, let me know and I'd be happy to help. I'd be thrilled to help you. So we went our separate ways, and about a year later, I got an email from her and she said, yeah, we're doing a project, we're doing an issue on cities. Can you do a future city for me? And I said, sure. So she said, well, you got 12 pages and you have to present a future city in 12 pages. So I said, okay. It was a little intimidating. So I got my team from Hong Kong together and we started looking at precedents on future cities. And what we didn't want to do was have something that was be outdated in 5 years. We wanted to avoid all the cliches of future cities with flying cars and things like that. So we really looked at some of the work that had been done previously. We did decide to bring forward the 10 principles from the city design practice as the structure or framework for our future city. And what we quickly realized, because she only gave us about 3 months to do this project, is we couldn't design a future city from scratch. It was just too much work. So what we decided to do was use projects from our portfolio or from around the firm to organize this 12-page submission or this 12-page article. So this was this is a cover of the issue. It's April of 2019. We had a small part in this. There was a number of other articles, as National Geographic always does. And so I'll just show you the spreads, what we ended up with. So this was the first 2 pages. So we had a big yellow city of the future opening page. And then on the next page on the right, there was a brief overview of how we did it. You can see our 10 principles here in bold. We organized it around 5 scales, from the region to an actual interior building. And I'll show you those. And that was very important to me and the team, was to talk about scale and show how a city would work at multiple scales. So the first thing we did was we drew the regional scale. And we actually used a real place. This is a part of the coastline of Asia, but there's no city there today. We created all of this. But what this allowed us to do is talk about how a city and its immediate regional context are so importantly intertwined. So we talked about agriculture. We talked about regional transportation connections shown in the orange lines. The agriculture is shown in the yellow color. We also wanted a coastal city because I think approximately 75 or 80% of the world's cities are within about 60 miles of a coastline. So even though there may be, and probably will be, significant sea level rise in the future, we still have cities on the coastline that we have to think about. So we had a coastal setback, which is shown in the green. We also had marine preserve areas on these islands. So it really presented a series of regional principles about how cities would be organized. And then across the bottom, you can see we had our 10 principles. So we tried to align each principle with the scale that we thought it most related to. So this was ecology and economy at the regional scale. The next scale that we looked at was what they called urban hubs. Usually we'd call this like a district or something. So here we talked about infrastructure and water, and you may recognize this rendering from the project in Kuala Lumpur. So we did repurpose that design concept. We introduced water, and in the upper right, more context into the project. But because this project so perfectly captured our ideas about this biomorphic concept, we felt it was appropriate to use it. Plus it was a competition, so we had the rights to reuse this material, so we did. again, a series of ideas at this scale. And then we also utilized this graphic. This is a cross section through that same urban district. And we wanted to talk about building height and density and how things would work relative to open space. So we introduced the coastal edge on the left-hand side. You can see a park in the middle of the project, and on the far right, that high-speed rail station that I mentioned earlier, and then introduce some of the underground components that a city might want to utilize. And then here you can see the principles across the bottom: waste, food, mobility, and heritage and culture. So this was actually a fold out in the National Geographic, 4 pages. So this was our big centerpiece. And then finally, we focused on the last 2 scales, which were the building scale on the left and the apartment scale or dwelling unit scale on the right. And the building on the left was actually a SOM skyscraper that had been designed for a competition. We did not win. So we repurposed that and talked about the ideas. There was a lot of really innovative ideas in that submission, that competition submission. So we talked to the team about using it, and they agreed. And then the drawing on the right was prepared by our London office, which was a separate research piece they were doing on the future of residential buildings. So again, in this scale, we talked about energy and livability. So we were able to align those 10 principles with a scale and talk about the issues that were most relevant to both that scale and the principles. So all in all, it was a really exciting and successful project we met the deadline and had it published, and the rest is history. I just wanted to close finally on a project that I'm working on right now. So I'm now based in Hong Kong, or in San Francisco, as Paul mentioned earlier, and bringing some of these ideas to the western part of the United States. And we were fortunate enough to win this project last year in Salt Lake City called The Point. And this site is today a prison, state prison site, and they're relocating the prison. So this 600-acre site, which you see in the upper left, is going to be completely vacant. And just by chance, it is the right size to create a 15-minute city, which is a relatively recent idea. I think most of you probably have heard of it, but it's an idea that you can meet all of your daily needs within a 15-minute walk. And this site, again, just happens to be the exact right size. So we said, let's make this the first 15-minute city in the United States. And it looks like it's on track to do that. Secondly, in the lower left, there was an idea to connect the river system, which is in the upper left, with the mountains of Salt Lake, which is in the lower right. So we wanted to create this connection, again, this ecological and recreational connection, what we called the river to range trail. And that would be the signature open space for this project. So instead of a central park, we wanted to create this linear regional open space, which looks like it's moving forward. So in the upper right, you can see the final plan. And in the lower right, you can see the open space master plan. You can see that river to range trail going through the middle of the project. We do have a central park in here. We wanted a civic space. But the other, I think, breakthrough idea here was to actually reposition most of the open space as a connective fabric. So moving away from, say, parks, which generally have somewhat limited use, and moving to a more connected open space system that could be used for biking, walking, actually getting to work. So it actually became part of the circulation system. We worked with a company called Design Workshop out of Colorado on the open space system. They were the landscape architects, did a great job. but we were also I was closely involved with the thinking on this. So here you see some renderings of that in the upper left, a view of the project as it could be built out in the future. You can see that river to range park and the bridges that'll jump over these infrastructure barriers. This is an interstate highway in the lower right, and another major highway and rail line in the upper left. So the whole idea here was about connection and being able to live and work here and also be able to move through the community without having to get in your car. In the lower left, you can see a rendering of the main road. So bike lanes, of course. We had a bus rapid transit system here. So the streets really become a multimodal environment, similar to some of those ideas I was talking about earlier for our projects in Jakarta. In the upper right, you can see that Central Park area. This would be a more typical type of open space for civic events and concerts, things like that. And then in the lower right corner, ideas about smaller scale spaces and buildings. It's actually a relatively low-rise project. The tallest building in the master plan is about 12 stories, which we were okay with. I think these concepts work just as well at low densities and low building heights as they do with high density cities that you saw in the National Geographic project. So the principles of biomorphic urbanism apply regardless of density. They're quite independent from density. So this is a project that we're continuing to work on today, and it's been a real treat to take some of that, some of those ideas that we developed in Hong Kong, have carried through to National Geographic, and now we're bringing back to the United States on the West Coast and in the Intermountain area. So Paul, I think I will leave it there. That's probably plenty to talk about. And happy to take any questions if you'd like.
Well, we have 5 questions in the Q&A, and I actually sent one through the chat. Perhaps we'll start with my, it's a comment, and I'd like to ask you if you could expound a little bit on the term you used called greenwashing and how that relates to concepts of green design, and then how it does it achieve anything close to regenerative design in buildings and in landscape systems?
Well, I think if you open any design magazine today or design website today, you see many, many projects with lots of buildings with lots of plants on them. And I would simply ask the question, is that is it restorative? What's the benefit versus the cost? I don't have an issue with, of course, plants on buildings or bringing nature into buildings or onto balconies or rooftops. That's all great, and it has a number of benefits. Green roofs are, wonderful ways to mitigate heat island effect and to manage stormwater on rooftops. So it's not that I have an issue with the larger concept. It's what's the cost benefit? And could those resources be better used, say, restoring ecosystems on the ground, for instance? So I just think amongst architects in particular, this idea of if you show a building with lots of landscape on it, that somehow that is a sustainable building. And I would say it's a much more complex question than just that. Not to say that there's not benefits. I actually think there are microhabitat benefits, for instance, with insects and perhaps smaller animals that may benefit from certain strategies like that. So it's not to say that there's no benefit, it's just a question of what that benefit is.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat before we get to the Q&As, I think, and it is one question I have, given your experience in Asia, what specific things should we who practice in the US learn from them? And if you could give a couple of examples, it would be appreciated.
That's a good question. I think one thing that anybody who's worked in Asia will appreciate is the focus and expediency in how they work. They tend to make decisions quickly. They tend to agree to larger principles. At least many of the cities and clients that I've worked with. And if you present a strong idea or a good idea or a innovative idea, they are often very quick to embrace that and move forward with it. So I think that was really inspiring. So we'd come in with these different ideas and they'd say, yeah, that's great, let's do it. There wasn't a lot of debate or conflict over some of these ideas. So I would hope that, in the US, we can maybe put aside some of the more extensive conversations around what's good practice and just move to building the best projects we can. I think the second thing is, maybe I touched on a little bit, is one of the things we heard a lot in Asia was this idea of social and cultural connection, or reflecting a local culture in the project. And that was one of the generative ideas behind biomorphic urbanism, this idea of cultural connectivity. So we were often asked that our projects be more specifically related to the location in which we were working through its architecture or its landscape. And so I think that's something we can learn as well. I think we're slightly better at that maybe in the US. That oftentimes, specifically our landscape architects, are very tuned into particular ecosystems and landscape contexts. But that's a universal goal, I would say, internationally.
All right, thank you. From Darius Vasquez Ramos, he just makes the comment that he hopes the presentation will be shared. If not, would you please repeat the biomorphic urbanism corollaries?
Sure. I think we're going to share them. Do you want me to go back through them right now?
You may, yes, certainly.
Let me back up and find them. Hold on a second. I guess by now I should probably have them committed to memory, but I don't. As
I've gotten older, my lecture notes have become my major tool. I used to be able to go through it without any problem. Now I'm referring to them all the time.
Is there another question I can take while I'm looking for those?
Sure, from Josh Seyfried. Peter, will you share how your background as a landscape architect has enabled your ability to take in complex urban problems and create informed, human-focused, and environmentally sensitive designs? Is your landscape architectural background unique amongst your urbanist peers?
I would say yes. My landscape training is, I'm not the only one with landscape background in our practice. There's many. We also partner with really talented landscape architecture firms and individuals. So there's a constant presence of landscape thinking in our urbanism work. But I think what's been unique in my practice and in my career is I often come back to my landscape training as the starting point for how I look at every project. So to me, just like in the biomorphic urbanism concept, my landscape training is fundamental to really how I even start a project. Anytime the first thing we often do, or I do, is I look at old Google Earth pictures to understand the landscape before there was anything on the site. So what did the land look like? What was going on there? And that is really fundamental. Joshua, I don't know if that answers your question, but. So, but I think just in conclusion, it shows up in so many ways. It's really remarkable. And I think the longer I practice, the more it shows up. So here are the corollaries. So the natural and ecological, natural and cultural systems are distinct, right? There's two separate systems. That's corollary number one. Corollary two is that each one has a distinct purpose and value. Corollary three is to recklessly hybridize them, is to potentially diminish both. Corollary four is that engineered systems that neither respect ecology or strength and culture have been too dominant in how we plan cities. Corollary five is we must design new cities and retrofit existing cities to strengthen ecological and cultural connectivity. And corollary six is to optimize both systems. So we consider them separately and distinctly, and then we merge them with intention and purpose. Yeah.
Dorilus Vasquez Ramos has a second question, and he comments that you show in the photos that geography around Hong Kong is very striking. Are there concerns that the high-rises will ruin beautiful views?
That's a tough question. They keep building high rises there, so no one seems particularly concerned about it. I think the other remarkable thing about Hong Kong is I think about 75% of the Hong Kong, of what they call the new territories, which is where Hong Kong is located, I think about 75% is permanently protected open space. So even though it looks very dense and these buildings are very tall and they look very close together and like they might begin to impede views, when you're there, actually, it doesn't feel that way. It's very easy to get out of the urbanized areas, to go to parts of the island or territory that is really where you don't even see any buildings whatsoever. So I'm not worried about that.
Dr. Kim, Junhyun Kim, would also like to comment on that question. Dr. Kim?
For the Hong Kong?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to visit the Hong Kong yet. But I think it's kind of the priority depending on the municipality's decision, right? About the carrying capacity for human settlement versus how much we can compromise with existing natural environment. Always, that's very difficult question, especially for landscape architect, I believe. But it's not only for like making money by having high-rise building, because in case of the Seoul, we have exactly the same dilemmatic situation to maintain a certain agenda from the municipality to provide a good human settlement by sacrificing or compromising a certain existing condition. That's a really great question, but really tough to answer. So I think that's why we should practice and being trained to get keen eyes to site analysis, as well as get some research to satisfy it as much as possible for all the stakeholders. Just that's my thought. So I'm not the Peter is today's right keynote. So I think he may have some more experience in terms of to delimit that kind of thing.
Peter, the next question from Mon Chéri Valentine. Thank you for sharing, first of all. what informed the development of the 10 city design principles, and then how has it also informed biomorphic urbanism?
Well, the 10 principles were developed by my mentor and boss, Phil Enquist. There originally was 9. And they didn't just show up one day. It's not like we just, came up with them one day and that's been our guiding ideas ever since. They actually evolved over several years. We had 9. We added heritage and culture as the 10th because we were all recognizing over the last 5 years or 6 years how important heritage is, this idea of specific identity of place. The trouble with the 10, so they've been a great structural element to our practice. The trouble with 10 is nobody can remember 10. So that, you asked what the relationship is to biomorphic urbanism. When I try and explain cities through the lens of the 10 principles, people's eyes glaze over and they kind of tune out. So I was searching for a simpler way to explain our concepts. And that's what led me to biomorphic urbanism. I just said there's really just 2 things that are the most important: ecology and culture. And from those 2, everything else flows. That tells you how dense to make something. It tells you how transportation systems could work. It tells you how to manage waste and water systems. So for me, it was just simpler to create a shorter list, frankly. And that's proved beneficial for me because I start my thinking around cities and urban design projects with those 2 starting points. And then you add in the other ones as necessary, right? So that's kind of the relationship, but it's not to diminish the 10. The 10 principles have always, and still are today, a key part of our practice. And in fact, they've now been adopted as the SOM's firm-wide principles. So they took our city planning principles and we've now incorporated them into everyone's practice, the architects, the engineers, and the interior designers. Now, for each discipline, we've created sort of some variations because obviously each discipline has different objectives. So they've proved to be very valuable and very powerful in terms of how we organize our work.
From Scott Arnold, any thoughts about homelessness and solutions biomorphism may offer?
That's obviously something we wrestle with on many projects. It's a very important and relevant issue here in San Francisco. We have quite a significant homeless population. I haven't really made a direct correlation between these ideas and social issues like homelessness or economic issues like homelessness. So I don't have a good answer for you. There may be a correlation or some connection we can make between the 2. I guess as a practicing professional, I've always tried to maybe approach the work through the lens of physical form and design and let other people who have more expertise in social and economic issues help us position that physical framework around social issues. It's really not my area of expertise, unfortunately. But it is something that we sometimes think about and try and use to talk about projects, for sure.
From Ted Cook, did the concept of the 15-minute city originate in a specific region, like Europe or Asia?
Yeah, the 15-minute city actually was a term that was coined by the mayor of Paris about, I'd say, 3 or 4 years ago. And she put forward the idea that she would like to re-envision Paris as a series of 15-minute cities, meaning, as I said, that you can meet your daily needs within a, she called it a 15-minute bike ride, or she used that metric. So 15-minute bike ride, I mean, you can ride pretty far in 15 minutes, couple miles easily, if not more. So that's where it originated. It's subsequently been adopted by different politicians, different planners, and there's lots of variations on it. But the general concept was originated in Paris. We also, in the pandemic, have used that idea to talk about what resources are available to people, because we've all been stuck at home generally. The idea of 15-minute cities become much more relevant during the pandemic, because you need that access to everyday goods and services close to your house. So yeah, that's kind of the history of it.
All right. 2 more questions in the Q&A, and another one from Darilis Ramos. How do the application of these principles of biomorphic design in landscape architecture projects impact cost?
I think they are supportive of a more economical way to build. I think they lower costs in general. Development costs, you're not building extensive stormwater management systems. You're not building in parts of the landscape where it's less suitable to build. So you're not building expensive foundations or expensive infrastructure. So if we just use ecosystems and the ecology of the land to tell us where the best place to build is, that reduces costs, because you're not trying to mitigate all these potential issues around ecology. One of the principles of biomorphic urbanism, if you remember, is to build more compactly and more efficiently. So once you determine where to build and minimize the infrastructure costs to do so, building more compactly and densely reduces further the infrastructure costs. It also reduces transportation costs, because you don't necessarily have to build a lot of roads to move around. So I think it has tremendous cost savings in just how we build cities and projects, actually. I can't prove that to you, with firm numbers, but just intuitively, I feel like that's true. And that's becoming apparent on our Salt Lake project, where we incorporate a lot of those ideas.
Very good. One last question in the Q&A from Anahad Vishwanath. Thank you for sharing, Peter. Based on your experiences in working in Asia and Australia, did you get a chance to apply some of the ideas and principles in projects here in the US as well?
Yeah, I think our Salt Lake project is an example of that. There's a few projects I did not share. We looked at South San Francisco Bay as part of a research effort where we talked about which part of the bay should be better suited for development, or is better suited for development. And we called that study Contested Territories, which talked about this idea of the water edge being contested by both development, but then also by sea level rise. There's competing demands for our water edge. And so the study really took these principles and ideas that I've talked about here today and said, okay, if you look and apply these to San Francisco, what would that mean for development along the Bay Edge? So that was quite a revealing study, and ironically, we just were awarded a project on the very site where we did one of these studies. So now we have a chance to put our money where our mouth is and see if the concept actually works. So yeah, we've been applying these. I've been applying these ideas in all of my projects actually, but they show up in different ways. You know, not every project is perfectly suited to all these concepts. You have to be selective about where you want to put your energy and what ideas really will resonate with the client.
We have one more question that is in the chat from Max Delow. Has China's recent ban on skyscrapers affected the work of your firm?
To be determined. I think it's going to bode well for our urban design practice, that's for sure, because cities will need to densify and fill in. Yeah, no, I think, you know, China's seen many new skyscrapers go in over the last 20 years. Our firm has done a very small portion of them. I think, let's say 20, but hundreds of, if not thousands of tall buildings have gone into China in the last 20 years. So I think it will have an impact, but you know, our firm does a lot more than just high rises. In fact, our high rise work is a fairly small percentage of our overall portfolio.
Okay, I have two comments for you out of the chat from the ASLA student chapter. Wants to thank you for a fantastic presentation. And from Patrick Judd, the president of the Michigan chapter of the ASLA, thank you for a great presentation on a visionary approach to designing cities of the future. The last question of the night. So this will be the last question of the night. What's your favorite Belgium beer? See you in San Francisco this November.
Yeah, Patrick and I are old friends from our time in school together. So hi, Patrick. I would have to say Duvel, I think, is my favorite Belgian beer, but that's also the only one I can remember. So I'll just say Duvel.
All right. Peter, I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation, and we have one more thing to do. I'm going to share my screen, so if you would stop your share so that we can make this little transition here.
Turn off my camera, you mean?
Yeah, not your camera. I'm going to share my screen now.
Okay. We
would like to congratulate you on being our 2022 MSU LA Distinguished Alumni. The plaque that will be mailed to you now, instead of me handing it to you in person, reads Michigan State University, the School of Planning, Design and Construction, Landscape Architecture, excellence in professional practice, presented to Peter Kindel, 2022 MSU LA Distinguished Alumni. Peter, thank you so much for being here, for your time, and a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Well, thanks, Paul and Chairman Kim. As I said at the beginning, you know, I grew up in East Lansing. I went to Michigan State, so this award means a lot. My parents still live in East Lansing. My dad was a professor at Michigan State, so we have a long history with the university, and I'm extremely proud to be a MSU alum. And this award is really a wonderful sort of you know, cap to a career that's hopefully still going to go a little bit longer. Not quite finished yet.
All right, that's good to know. Good to know. Well, we'll happily welcome you back anytime to participate in design studios or to guest lecture. I know you do frequent East Lansing quite often, every chance you get. So
yep.
you are always welcome. Dr. Kim, any final words from you this evening?
No, I think, yeah, I really appreciate for your some quite great presentation. And by having those questions, I confirm how difficult to be our distinguished alumni. Those questions were tough, I believe, but we are really been honored by having you as our 2022 LA Distinguished Alumni. And I really appreciate Wesley and Mary Beth's help to organize today's event. And also, I appreciate Professor Nierako's the facilitation of today's event.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Thank you both. And thanks to Mary Beth and to Wesley Kennedy, who are working in the background for us. So thanks to our tech support there. Oh, one more something in the chat. Trish Mockimer says, Mazel Tov. Thank you for sharing your work, Trish Mockimer. And I know you know Trish.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's been a real pleasure. So I wish you all good luck with the snowstorm and the rest of the semester.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. And what is our next speaker series event? That's the item I forgot. No one knows. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get that information out to you. Pay attention to the events tab on the SPDC website for updates on the speaker series, and have a very good evening. Everybody stay safe out there.
Thank you.